Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, our hurdle to get past. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the Telegram channel, which you can find a link to in the description below. Remember, we do have the premium list at intothecryptoverse.com. Let's go ahead and jump in. Now, we've often spoken about a nebulous $100,000 Bitcoin. And of course, there are a lot of people that say it's going to happen this year, a lot of people that say it's going to happen next year, or even after. But it begs the question, if everyone in the world thinks that Bitcoin's going to go to 100K, then why is it already not there? Because it would mean that, well, the current prices are a bargain, you know, if everyone in the world were to think it's going to go to 100K. Well, the simple reason is because not everyone believes it, right? Not everyone believes it. Now, one of the things I would say is that for Bitcoin, there is a hurdle for the bulls to get past, all right? And clearly, as long as you've not been living in a cave for the last few weeks, you've probably seen this very analysis that I'm going to show you, okay? And we're gonna talk about, you know, what would have to happen for the analysis or this pattern to break and for the bulls to just take off and the bears then have to potentially FOMO back in and admit defeat. What would happen if the bears are right in the short term, and then what are the general implications for the market? Okay, so this is what I'm talking about, all right? And again, I know you guys have seen this elsewhere as well, but I'm just gonna show it on the channel. So the general thinking is, all right, well, we have this first peak over here back in January. So let's call it 1, okay? And then we had another major move up here. We'll say this is 2, 3, 4, and 5. All right, so we were actually putting in fairly impressive moves, one after another, and then this one ultimately did not put in a new all-time high, okay? This one sort of, it fell short. And then what you could look at is, well, what about today? Over the last several weeks, we had a similar pattern, right? One, this first move up, this impulsive move back to the upside, a pullback, then a second peak here, and then a pullback. And then again, these are slight improvements upon the prior local highs, right? The first one here was the biggest. The second one, not quite as much. And then we then put in another one, 3, and then 4. So the question now, right? The question now, and this is what the Bitcoin bulls need to overcome, is this one going to play out the same way? Now, one thing I should say is that market participants do not always have to respond in the same way. Okay, there's plenty of examples in the past where things play out differently, even though the pattern looks the same. Okay, this is one of the major gripes I have with, say, traditional TA, is because a lot of times it just simply does not play out how people might anticipate, and I think those short-term moves are often a little bit too deterministic. But this is what we need to look at, and I think this is what is sort of holding some people back from buying into the idea of Bitcoin going to $100,000, because they're looking at this and saying, well, you know, it looks pretty dang similar, right? It looks pretty similar to what we saw before. Now, what would have to happen for the analysis, this analysis, to be voided, right? To essentially be nullified? Well, one idea would just be simply going back up and putting in a new high, right? Because, I mean, after this move here, when we came back up, we actually only made it, if we take a measured move down, it was about an 8 or 9% drop from the prior high, okay? And then if this one were to go down 8 to 9%, well, then we're already there. But that doesn't really do the move justice, because you can see that this bounce actually went a lot higher than, say, this one did. Now, the reason this one looks a lot higher is because the drop was a lot more. This one was about a 28% drop, whereas this one here was only about an 18% drop. So let's suppose if we took, you know, some ratio there and then dubiously speculated, let's say from 8% or so, or 9% or something, and let's just say, all right, well, what if this one is say, like, it comes within 5%? Well, if it came within 5%, then we'd be flirting with around $50,000, okay? So what I'm looking at here is Bitcoin's knocking on the door right now of 48K, okay? And the question is, can Bitcoin rally back to 50K? Which I think a 50K Bitcoin, I mean, you know, this can happen, right? It wouldn't be that hard for Bitcoin to go back to 50K. It would just be moving up by a couple $1,000s, which of course could happen on a Tuesday. So let's suppose that Bitcoin goes back to 50K. I think this is what a lot of people are going to be watching. Can it break this pattern that it was in over here and do something different? And here's the interesting part. And I think this is what we need to pay attention to. Q4 is coming up. Okay, Q4 is coming up. And a lot of times, in a lot of Q4s, we've seen Bitcoin do relatively well. Now, a lot of people believe that Q4 is when the market cycle peak will occur. I'm not one of those people. I think we have a ways to go this market cycle. I don't think it'll be in Q4. If the charts end up proving otherwise along the way, then of course I will admit it. But I have a hard time thinking that Q4 will be a market cycle top for Bitcoin. One of the things is we haven't even seen new all-time highs since since April. We haven't seen new all-time highs since April. If you go back, and a lot of people love to compare this cycle with the last cycle because the last one peaked in December. If you go back and look at this cycle, we were putting in all-time highs almost every single month. Not every month, but most of the months, okay? We put a new all-time high in June. We didn't do it this June. We put in a new all-time high in August. We didn't in September. We put a new all-time high in October. So during the last run, Bitcoin was regularly putting in all-time highs every couple of months, which ultimately led into this final parabolic move. This time, we're not even at an all-time high, and we haven't even been at an all-time high since May. Okay, I mean, it's been quite a while since we've been at an all-time high. So, you know, is it possible that Bitcoin puts in a market cycle peak in December? Yeah, anything's possible. And we're not gonna say that it can't happen. It could happen. And if Bitcoin is going to, like, say $150,000 by the end of the year, then it's very likely that it could be the market cycle peak. Okay. But the other idea is, well, you know, I mean, it could also extend into 2022. I don't think there's necessarily anything, you know, completely forbidding Bitcoin from doing something like that. Even though I know that sounds a bit crazy to the people that are of course planning on it happening in Q4. But what's interesting is if you look at the range of this bounce, okay, and if we draw, say, from the bottom here to then when we first got that major sell-off, it was about 17 days or so. And if we go to, say, this capitulation wick here and go out 17 days, guess where it puts us? It puts us at the very end of September, okay? So right when Q4 is about to kick off. And Q4, remember, is when a lot of people think that Bitcoin is going to go on this parabolic move. My thinking on all of this, to be completely clear, is, you know, you really shouldn't bet your Bitcoin position on anything happening in the short term. I would just, you know, it's not financial advice. I can tell you what I'm doing. And that's just having a Bitcoin position ready to go and not betting the family farm on either going, you know, on a pullback. Okay, I would not bet the family farm on it pulling back. Like if you sell your Bitcoin with the hopes of buying in lower, you can really get burnt. Okay, you really can. Now, what would have to happen again for this analysis to not come true, or to void, and essentially where the bears will have to capitulate and acknowledge that Bitcoin is going to actually go up and put in new all-time highs? Well, it needs to break 53K, all right? It needs to break 53K. That's the line in the sand, my friends, all right? If we can break 53K and move up, then we are definitively changing the pattern that we saw from last time. Okay, 53K. So keep that number in your head. If we get hung up around 50K and we can't go past it, and let's just say we get to like 50K, 50.5K, then this is potentially in the cards. But what's interesting about that scenario is that if it does play out, you can see that the place that we dropped to was that first sell-off from the first peak. Okay, so here's the first peak here. And if we were to drop back to that level, it would actually be around $37,000 to $38,000. All right, so just below 40K. That would sort of be the area I imagine that people who are following this pattern would be looking at if it say bounces up to 50K or just over 50K. And then if it does end up coming down in October, that might be the region to look out for. And what's interesting is if it does that, it'll probably go against what people might think will happen going into October. But my speculation even then is that if that happens, I think it only provides, again, another opportunity. Like I don't see these things as issues. Everyone always complains about Bitcoin going down, and then when Bitcoin goes up, they whine about not having bought more when it was lower prices. If it were to go down to say $38,000 or something, we would have to acknowledge that it would be below the 20-week moving average, which of course is something to consider. But it's also possible that that is only a wick, and then we get back above 41 or 42K by the end of the week. Note that if it did something like this and we go into another lull for a little while, same plan as before, my friends. Right? Same plan as before. That is when you continue to just load up and you just wait and you wait and you wait, and then Bitcoin will eventually bail you out. All right. So my speculation on all of this, at least in the short term, of course, well, I should say lack of speculation, because I do think it's hard to know if these things are actually going to play out. I wanted to just bring it to your attention because I know some people are talking about it, and I wanted to provide my thoughts on it. Is it possible that it plays out like that, where we get a push to 50K and we then drop back down for another pullback, maybe back to this area before we can kind of reclaim some of that ground and then push higher? It is certainly possible, but I certainly wouldn't bet on that happening. Okay, I wouldn't bet on that happening by any stretch of the imagination. And if it does happen, then we might just look at these as sort of stepping stones to hopefully ultimately move higher if this were to happen. Okay, so that's what I'm sort of looking at this point. I wanted to put it on the screen. I know a lot of you guys have seen this before, and if you have a hard time visualizing it, like if it doesn't look similar to you, one of the things you can do is you can draw the bar pattern, and you can just simply say take this move here and then pull it over here, and then what you'll have to do is you'll just have to like say shrink it down, okay? And then you'll start to see some of the similarities, right? You'll start to see some of the similarities here. And I think the question of course is it going to play out and have a move to 50K before ultimately coming back down to 37, 38K as one last capitulation potentially before finally trending higher? It's possible, but again, I wouldn't bet the family farm on it. I would just say have your Bitcoin position ready to go, and if it does drop, it just represents one more opportunity. What are some things that could make this happen? Okay, I think if the stock market has a pullback, and the stock market has already started pulling back a little bit, if the stock market has a 10 to 15% pullback, then it would very likely affect Bitcoin in the short term. Okay, now I think betting against the stock market, historically speaking, is not a good thing. If, like Bitcoin, if you either had to be a perma bull or a perma bear, you certainly would be a lot better off just being a perma bull. I tend to be a bull, a Bitcoin bull with a couple panda bears next to me to keep me in check, right? I mean, I don't just want to say it's only ever going to go up. You guys remember back in April and May, I told you guys, I said we're ahead of schedule. We need a summer lull, and a lot of people gave me a hard time about that. Because of course back then everyone was calling for $300,000 Bitcoin by September, and they'll pretend like they didn't predict that, but that is exactly what they predicted, and they like to say that a lot, exactly as predicted. But a lot of them predicted $300,000 Bitcoin by September, and it did not play out, right? Not even close. So let's just take a step back. Don't stray, just DCA, right? If we break the line at 53K, then it's going to leave a lot of people behind. And the way that happens is if we ultimately end up holding the 8-week moving average as support. Okay, so let me just show that really quick. So the way it happens is if we hold the 8-week SMA as support here, okay, then we're not going there, right? And there are some differences between what happened last time and what happened this time. For instance, this first capitulation that took us down, took us below the 8-week on the weekly time frame. This one did not. I mean, we had a couple of wicks down there, but it didn't take us below it. You know, we didn't have a weekly close below it or anything. So I think that's maybe the best counterpoint to the analysis, is that, they're not exactly the same, right? And the thinking is that if the 8-week holds, okay, and we actually go higher than 53K, then I think a lot of the bearish analysis that you might see elsewhere, it's not going to hold up, right? It's just simply not going to hold up anymore. And at that point, we should be off to the races sooner rather than later. If you guys like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the Telegram channel, which you can find a link to in the description below. Remember to check out the premium list at intothecryptoverse.com. Thank you for tuning in, subscribe, click the bell icon to turn on notifications, and I will see you next time. Bye.